we're going to end up in this really bad place where nobody will say anything, and suddenly just social progression and societal progression as a whole will just stop.
Hi everyone, welcome back. So lovely to see you guys. So my name is Mamobo Ogoro and welcome to Gorm TV. We are a web show and creative network that dissects the social issues that affect Ireland's multicultural generation. So with me today, I have my wonderful panelists. I have a couple of new faces here that are ready to highlight some issues of their own and highlight some their opinions on the topics that we're going to be discussing from now on. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing the topic of cancel culture. So I know that this topic is very topical all around the world, but I kind of wanted to talk about it in our sort of context and talk about, okay, what is cancel culture in 2021? How can we move past it? Who exactly gets canceled? And can we move, can we be redeemed from being cancelled in 2021? So can anyone kind of just give me a brief definition of what they think cancel culture is?
I think just go on. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
No, I actually had to check this because I wasn't sure. So I checked the dictionary and it says, I kind of had an idea, but it's of support for public figures in response to objectionable behavior or opinions. So let's say if a writer or a politician writes something that can be considered offensive on Twitter or Facebook, maybe some of their supporters will withdraw their support. So I think it's happening a lot, and I don't know, I'm a bit unsure. I mean, I can understand where people are coming from. It's about holding people accountable, and I think it's wrong to write something that is, spreading hatred towards minorities. But on the other end, there is a danger that people become too afraid to say anything. And I think it can happen to everyone, that sometimes you just write something on social media without thinking. And if you can lose your job because of that, it may be a bit too much. I don't know. It's I'm not sure one way or the other. It's an interesting phenomenon, and I think it can be helpful to try and make people understand that some extreme ideas are not acceptable. But on the other end, I think there is a danger that people are becoming uncomfortable to talk about things if they think that they're not politically correct. And I believe it's also a generational thing, because I was talking with older people, and sometimes they have the feeling that, in this day and age, they're not really free to say what they think because people can take offense. And so, yeah, I think that's my contribution for now. Yes.
Sandrine. Oh, thanks a million. Sandrine, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Tiziana. I think it's a very hard thing to define, but I kind of look at it from accountability essence. So I kind of look at it from, let's say, with the celebrity culture that we have. Do you know, where you find celebrities where they would have tweeted something back in 2014, and then it resurfaces now, and the only reason they're apologizing, it's because they've gotten caught. Do you know? So they still have, you're saying, I'm a different person now, I've changed. And you just know that's the PR that's after writing that. So it kind of has created that generational thing, where no one believes that they can go back and find tweets or even shows. I was recently rewatching American's Next Top Model, and the things that they're saying that is outrageous. And back in the day, that was acceptable. They had an episode where they all got to change race. I don't know in what planet that was acceptable, but then on TikTok, certain people were finding it, and they held Tyra Banks accountable. And and her excuse was oh, it was okay at the time. That was never okay. And that came into light. So I could see that that's a positive, where you are holding celebrities, I'm just talking about from the celebrity point of view, accountable. But then when you kind of bring it down to a mundane thing, it becomes very toxic, that when you're going on Twitter or just online or anything like that, or even just conversations that you have with people, that you're just on a quick get-go to be like, that's wrong, and I'm going to tell my friend, and then we're going to cancel you. So it becomes like people just kind of have this moral high ground when it comes to it, where like they're like, no, if you don't agree with my opinion, instead of being like, oh, can you let me know what you think so and so, it's like, no, I read from a book or this that it's wrong, so I'm going to go and like spread things about you to say that what you believe in was wrong. So like straight away, like that person is cancelled, as opposed to just sitting down and having that like relationship. So like I can see it being beneficial when we're looking at like political figures, celebrities, because they should know better. But then like when it is like just day-to-day conversation, it's very quick to like cancel someone when they don't agree with you, and it's very like toxic, because then you just have people just bandwagging then, because it's like, oh, I don't want to get cancelled. So like, yeah, I think it's really like when we are looking at that, we really need to like differentiate and kind of break it down in different layers to understand how like our society works.
Definitely. Thanks a million, Sandrine. Sarah, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, no, I agree to with Sandrine, but I just, in regards to like, yes, okay, accountability, I think the thing is we look at cancel culture as probably an extension from calling it out culture, you know, and there's a difference there. And I think we kind of mix that and get that kind of conflicted in the sense of, you know, it's just cancel someone out, you know, by withdrawing support for that person because of something that they've said that is objectionable or offensive. But at the same time, that's calling it out. You're calling the person out, whereas canceling someone can cause, in my opinion, greater harm than good, in the sense that we could be cancelling them all out altogether and actually not hearing them out. So for example, I will go to kind of like Trump. There was kind of like a cancel out when Twitter completely removed Trump. Yes, we all felt good about that. It was great. He was gone. But Trump's followers felt cancelled out, and that pushed them onto a different platform, which was Parler, a really right-wing platform for them to, you know, continue on the rhetoric, to continue on the problems. And it was kind of like, for us, it made us feel good in the sense that out of sight, out of mind, but that's dangerous, you know what I mean? So I have a fear of this kind of cancel culture. Yes, and also like one of the points as well, cancel culture stemmed from actually a misogynistic joke from a film where there was a gangster, you know, he literally, there was a breakup and he said, cancel that out, I'll buy another one, regards a woman. So it was a misogynistic joke. So that kind of led to kind of like a kind of an extension of this kind of like, I'm just going to drop you, not going to, you know, hear it, cancel you out completely, kind of aggressiveness to the kind of conversation and narrative, you know. So I fear this kind of concept of cancel culture, and I fear the way it's been kind of conflated with kind of the idea of, you know, calling it out culture, which I think is very important and really is seeking kind of a more of accountability process when you call it out and say, hold on a moment, you know, you tweeted this in this year, now you believe a different way. Have you changed your mind? Have you gone on this learning journey? Could you, you know, apologize for what you said back in blah 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 X year, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a mix between the cancel culture and calling it out, and I just have a fear of kind of that extension of calling it out culture with that's led to kind of this cancel concept.
Definitely. And what I understood from what you were saying is like the part where people, when they are cancelled, they kind of retreat, like with your example with Trump, they retreat within their own circles and then kind of stay in those certain beliefs that they could have and not have that opportunity to grow, right?
And it's dangerous. And it's dangerous when you do that to people of power. So you're talking about people of influence, you're talking about celebrities, you're talking about people that sit on boards, you're talking about politicians. They have, you know, a large sum of power and an influence on people. If you completely cancel them out in that sense, you could be cancelling out their followership. And that is dangerous because that's a large cohort of people. And that's not what we want to do. We want to invite these people in and understand where they're coming from and actually say, what you're doing is wrong. And we're not going to tolerate it. And we're going to hold you to account. You know, justice is greater than this sense of kind of satisfaction of saying, what you said is wrong and I'm not going to talk to you anymore. You know, you're out of the picture. But actually seeking justice and accountability is stronger.
Definitely. Thanks a million, Sarah. I'm going to go to Eric and then to Gareth after Eric.
Yeah, I just want to agree with everyone who spoke thus far. I think everyone put it brilliantly. I think to touch briefly on Sandrine's point, to touch on one aspect of cancel culture, she talked about conversations and discussions and holistic discussions to try and sway people away from viewpoints they hold which are aggressive. I think ultimately speaking, in my opinion, as per how I see the world and how we can progress in terms of discourse, I think that's the way to go. I think it's the most challenging thing to do, to see someone who holds a view that you don't have, and deep down inside that what they may believe in or what they may say is wrong, and you simply you want to stop them from saying that. And I think this speaks to what we call cancel culture, the phenomenon. However, all this does is it prohibits that one individual from being able to say what they're saying. The ideas still live on. So Sarah touched on Donald Trump. Trump is banned from Twitter and other social media platforms, but Trumpism is far from dead. And when you cancel your figures who uphold particular views that are bad, what that might do for their base and their followers is make them out to be some kind of a martyr for their ideas, which are inherently wrong. So I think we need to believe those who are trying to promote good within society, need to believe in the intellectual nature of what they have to say enough to challenge other ideas, rather than to curtail the actions of individuals who hold bad ideas. Although it's important to hold people account and it's important to promulgate ideas that are positive, I think it's equally as important to challenge ideas that are bad for everyone to see. So the people who hold those views, who are not necessarily bad faith actors, but believe in something which might be misguided, can be convinced out of their ways, which may not be progressive. Secondly, I think it's very important to take a historically relative approach when we're talking about modern day cancel culture. If we to cancel an individual, if there's a group that cancel an individual, you have to be 100% certain that the view you hold is morally superior to the view that who the person you're canceling holds. And I think, I don't think any human being at any point in time in history, including now, can ever do this, because in 100 years' time, people might look back and think that we held views that are aggressive. If we look back to apartheid South Africa, the mainstream view at that time was that Black people were inherently inferior. It was a legal and a scientific view. The majority of people within that society would have believed that. It's the campaigners like Nelson Mandela that campaigned against that were cancelled. So the moral zeitgeist is continuously changing. So I don't think we should assume the role of moral judges, but instead promote ideas that we feel are good, be willing to grow, and be willing to enhance the growth of other individuals for their well-being, and go the extra mile. So yes, this would be my view on cancel culture.
Definitely, that's a great one. Thanks a million for that, Eric. Gareth, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, it was just something that Sarah said really kind of struck with me about like trying to get to understand people with opposing views. My opinion on like social progression as a whole is you can't progress together as a society if only half the people are invited to the table, so to say. Like everyone has to be invited to these discussions, whether it be like feminism, queer rights, racism. We need to, as a society, come together and discuss them. And yes, we won't necessarily agree with everyone at the table, but it's about having that space, because I'm afraid with cancel culture that, like we've been saying, that it pushes people kind of into the fringes and into we all want to be heard. That's why we're here. They want to be heard as well, just in a different way. And if we push them and so like cancel them, then like their opinions won't get heard and they'll only feel alienated and go to an even darker place or a more extreme way of getting their voice heard. And that's what I'm really afraid of. And as a whole, cancel culture in a way, like, it makes me angry, because I think holding people accountable is now considered cancel culture, which is not right. And there's one incident that whenever I see the word cancel culture, that I think of in particular. There was this man on Twitter, nobody in particular, that he put up an offensive tweet. But once he was told this was offensive, he took it down. He apologized, put up a tweet saying, I won't do this again. I'm terribly sorry to anybody that I offended. But there was this one woman in particular that who was in his replies, who kept saying, I've screenshotted it. I'm contacting your boss in the morning. They will know what you said. And he said, but I've apologized. I've taken it down. I'm willing to grow. And she said, no, I'm not accepting that. Your CEO will get an email from me in the morning. And that's what I'm afraid of, that if people are genuinely sorry and are willing to grow, and so-called cancel culture still attacks them, like, we're just going to alienate people, and even people that we agree with, if they have said one thing that was deemed offensive or wrong, but are willing to grow from that situation, where it's simply just, we're going to end up in this really bad place where nobody will say anything, and suddenly just social progression and societal progression as a whole will just stop. And that's what I'm really afraid of.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. To be honest, kind of what struck me with what you were saying there, Gareth, is this like, there is no, with cancel cultures, there's no room for redemption. And that's kind of what I want to follow through with this conversation as well. Like, so I understand with for celebrities, like they're millionaires and stuff, and if they get cancelled, sure, like their life goes on. But with like the everyday person or someone that makes a mistake, when they get cancelled, can they be redeemed from that? Like if someone goes and contacts your boss and you lose your job, can they get redeemed from that if they're wholly remorseful? Or like, that's kind of where I'm going from. And sometimes are they only remorseful because they were caught out? That's kind of what I want to ask as well. Does anyone have any sort of takes on that as well? Sandrine?
Yeah, I think like it always goes back to the genuineness of people. So like with what Gareth gave, like with that example, like I think like it's very unfair to cancel that person. Like if like, because sometimes like even within conversations, like let's say even within race, like even Black people like say wrong things to other Black people. And then it is one of those things like where like if you just engage with healthy dialogue, you can kind of gauge it yourself to be like, okay, is this person like genuine and do they want to grow? Because like as both Gareth and Eric were saying, like if we're literally living in this moral high ground, because like who gets the right to say, like, you know, like I can go on Twitter, find an account knowing that it's going to be offensive and like bring attention to that, but like it's like I'm literally going out of my way to find it, as opposed to being able to like, if I saw something that I didn't agree with, I can just DM the person and be like, oh, do you know, I don't really agree. And then like if you're engaging with that conversation and like you just know that they're not going your way, then you can kind of be like, okay, we'll agree to disagree and just move on from that. Because like it's very unhealthy to kind of always surround yourself with people that just agree with you, because you're not challenging like your own social background, like your own social surrounding or anything like that. And like by doing that, then you are becoming like, you are inheriting that policing of being like, I'm right and you are wrong. And so then like everyone around you then is always going to be like, oh, I can't be myself, or I'm a Mamobo, because God forbid if I use the wrong term, I use this. Because like I'm just seeing that like with a lot, like even with, you know, like gender neutral terms and everything like that, like no one knows what to say anymore, because like no one is engaging in that, and like no one is being like, do you know what, sorry, I didn't like say like what genders I want to be pronounced with. Or like even if like I've seen like with you know, even the term Black and Irish, like people are like, oh, can I call you Black? And I'm not. It's like, just ask. But it's because like you're literally going to go on Twitter and you're going to be like, if you were to ask that question, you'll get cancelled. So people don't really know how to like engage with healthy dialogues by finding one person, by being like, oh, Mamobo, like, you know, I saw Gorm, like I really want to know like about this. Everyone is so scared of that. But that's because of cancel culture, like where they just think that anything I ask, like because I genuinely don't know, I'm going to look like I'm being offensive. And that's because like they've probably been around someone else who has like canceled them for genuinely asking them a question. So then like we're living in a society then where no one is curious anymore. No one wants to really engage with like healthy dialogue, or like just find out more about like different I know, just different topics, like understand like, oh, what does race mean in an Irish context, this. It's like, I'm too scared to ask, so I'm just going to stay quiet. And like as Eric had said earlier, then their preconceived notion of that topic, which might be misguided, it's never going to be like talked about, because they've just stayed quiet because they're just so scared that someone is going to cancel them. So like, yeah, we've kind of like lived in that, where we've taken away that curiosity and that conversation because everyone is just so scared of saying the wrong thing, like either online or just face to face.
Definitely. Thanks a million for that there. And I totally agree with you that people are just like scared to offend. And I understand at the same time, some people that they're asking the question to, they may be offended. But yeah, sometimes cancel culture, it kind of takes that spark away, that curiosity away. And a lot of times educating yourself is being curious. So it's important to have that. I'm going to move to Sarah and then Eric.
Does Eric want to make a point first?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I don't mind. I don't mind. I can briefly make a point if you're okay with that. Yeah, no, sorry. I was just going to say very briefly, touching on Sandrine's point. Actually, before I get to that point and the point of redemption, which I think is a paramount factor, which should always be included in any conversation about cancel culture, I'm going to first acknowledge where cancel culture will, in theory, lead us, in principle. So, if cancel culture was maintained as a social policy that we all just conform to, it'd bring us to a place, if we just follow the line of just canceling individuals who say things that do not speak to what we believe to be the moral standard of our time. 100 years ago, it was slavery in particular places. Now it's whatever we deem to be the moral standard. At the end of this line, we're going to live not in a society where people can converse in ways that are based upon their authentic ways of seeing the world, including the flaws and the virtues of those ways, but instead in an echo chamber where everyone is speaking to a standard and where the only time you can honestly express how you feel is at your dinner table. And a lot of those views might be hateful views, but because you're not saying it in the public arena of discourse where they can be challenged openly and where you can learn, you're saying it behind closed doors, which means the social ills like the discriminatory views people might have, racism and homophobia and the like, are never going to be challenged because we don't believe in our intellectual ability to challenge them publicly so everyone can see how wrong they are. So I think this is where the theory of cancel culture leads us. And in terms of redemption, very briefly, I think if I went to my Facebook page and went to what I posted statuses 5 years ago when I was early in secondary school, I could probably find some things that would cancel me. So I don't believe, I think human evolution in an individualistic context should never be undermined. Who we are today is so different to who we'll be in 3 years' time. So you should not judge, I should not be condemned to it like eternal condemnation, subjected to eternal condemnation because of things I do in the finite moment that I'm in right now. Because the phase I'm in right now might be different to the phase I'm in next year. You just have to give me the chance and the ingredients to grow and to get to a better phase next year. So this is not what cancel culture does. You stop people in one phase, they then are stuck in their own echo chamber with the views that you condemn them for, and you don't get the chance to progress to the next phase. And I don't think that's right, holistic, or sustainable. Yes, at all.
Definitely. Thanks, Eric. With your comments there on Facebook, I was just thinking, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, there's some of the things that I posted as a teenager. I always say, like, between the ages of like 16 to 20 are just the stupid years. And I've just done some stupid things that they probably will come up again. But yeah, it's just really important to like understand that people do grow and they develop, they learn from their mistakes, and they shouldn't be like, be judged wholeheartedly on the things that they've done when they were young and stupid. So Sarah, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, no, and that's like I said, I've always said it, we're on a learning journey, and I think that learning journey will end when we go to our graves. It'll continue on and on and on, and we have to remember that even the views that we have today will be very different to the views that we may have in 10 years time because of our lived experiences. But in terms of like forgiveness and accountability, just something came to my mind was, that you said, how do you know if it's genuine, with regards to, celebs and whatever? So what? You know what I mean? If they come out and they apologize on Twitter and they make an apology and they deep down don't mean it, but they've done that apology, we've created a platform or an environment that actually says this is what we tolerate and this is what we don't tolerate. You know what I mean? So if the apology is out there, it's out there. We can't control internally how a person genuinely feels, and nor should we, get too bogged down with it, in my opinion. You know what I mean? That's one aspect of how I would see it, because I think I've come to a point in my life where, if you've come out and said you've apologized for something that you've done, well, okay, you've done it. Now your followers will know that's not tolerable, and now people will understand that you actually do have to come out and apologize. Now, whether you as an individual don't feel, you did it for the sake of, what's trending and what's not, and so on. Okay, whatever. That I can't control that. You know what I mean? And nor do I want to. But with regards to accountability, I do think in terms of like, when you look at cancel culture and where it also, like, where it stemmed up from, and like I said earlier on, it was a misogynistic joke and so on. But we look at the hashtag Me Too movement, you know what I mean, and how that, the people called out certain individuals for, sexual harassment and so on, and then these people became, were cancelled and so forth. There's an accountability process there, and I do still think that is actually still a form of call it out culture rather than cancel culture. And I think that is important to remember, because I think anyone listening to this might turn around and say, well, what about the Me Too movement? What about LGBT or LGBTQ plus people and so on? Like, what about these people and what they've endured and so on? Like, it's really important to factor these things in. Yes, it is, but it's call out culture. It's a call out culture. And I think that's important. And I do think accountability is important. And that's where we meet that with certain legislations in place. So, for example, when it comes to hate crime, or, we talk about, freedom of speech, but if there's hate speech, where are the limits to that? And is there legislation in place to finite those kind of, like, those limits and what people can say and what people can't say in that sense, and what's deemed of an offense, an illegal offense. So I think in that regard, like, there's so much that society can do, and then there's so much that we can do when it comes to legislation as well.
Definitely.
For accountability.
Definitely, I totally agree with that. And bringing it to that level is so super important. I really resonate with what you were saying in terms of differentiating between call it out culture and cancel culture, because they're often conflated and people think they're the same thing. So I really agree with that there. I'm going to just move on to May and then Gareth there.
Yeah, this is touching on an earlier point that people are making about being able to learn from from your mistakes and what you're saying. I think the problem with cancel culture, the biggest problem with cancel culture today, is that it moves so fast. You can tweet something, you go to sleep and you wake up and there's a trending hashtag and you're cancelled and you might not even know why. And I think that's the problem, that you don't have any time to even reflect on what you said, or to discuss it with anybody, your parents, your friends, even people in the street. You might not be able to tell why it was offensive or how you could change before you're cancelled, before you're told that you don't have a chance to apologize or to grow or to evolve from what happened. So I think the magic of the internet has really just blown up cancel culture to something that is unstoppable, because at this point, cancel culture, it's almost like a social media campaign. You have trending hashtags, you have videos, TikToks all over the place, and you just can't escape it.
Definitely. Thanks, May. I think the fast nature of the internet, it doesn't even give time for people to have that time to reflect, to be accountable, because by that time they're already cancelled and they have no redemption. So I really resonate with your points there, Garrett.
Yeah, it was just something Sandrine said kind of resonated with me about opening that dialogue, like sending somebody a message, being like, I didn't agree with this, and then kind of engaging in that dialogue. And it just reminded me of this story that I once heard about this woman, that she was part of like a homophobic church, and they used to go around to all these events and say that like queer people were going to hell. It was wrong. But when she went to these events, she would go up to people to try and convince them of her views. But through that, so she would engage in dialogue with them, and through that dialogue, her opinions actually changed. And she ended up leaving the church because through that dialogue and understanding, she realized that it was wrong to be homophobic. And so she made the decision to leave her family and her church behind. But so I think, and in terms of redemption, not only did she like hold herself accountable, she is now, as I believe, a speaker for engaging in these dialogues, and she talks a lot about her life in the church and her life now. and she tries to bring forward this discussion of trying to help people understand their point of views, so then we can help kind of educate them on more social matters as well. So I think in terms of like redemption, I think it is possible. And if you're thinking about being genuine, I think apologizing is a very good place to start. But I think what really solidifies is it's what you do next. And if you, like this woman, if you continue to, even on, she's doing it on a huge, massive stage, and but if you even do it like with your friends, your family, kind of educating, if you hear, like if you put up a tweet that was offensive, you said something, you apologize, but then if you go off and if you hear one of your friends or family making the same comment and you say, look, I've learned that like that's not okay to say, we should really avoid that. I think that's kind of, that way of kind of putting it through society is a good way of understanding if it's genuine or not. But I definitely believe like redemption is possible. Like as we've been saying, growing is a continuous thing, and we won't stop growing till the day that we die. And I think that's a very important point to be made, that like as we've said, like I could have said things back in the past that were, could have gotten me cancelled. I could be saying stuff now that in 10 years time could be considered cancel worthy. So I think it's just important to understand that we are growing, and this woman is a symbol of like that we can redeem ourselves and just make life better for everyone through education. So I think there is issues with cancel culture, but I think there is definitely room for redemption there.
I wholeheartedly believe that too. Thanks a million, Garrett. Sandrine, were you going to add something?
Yeah, it was just kind of like touch on Garrett's point there in regards to education, because like just listen to what everyone is saying. We kind of keep referring to the past, right? But like your question was to do with 2021. So like my thing is kind of like with cancel culture, it's kind of like with what May was saying, like the fast nature of it. It showed us the power of social media. So it's kind of like when we are looking at 2021, like where it kind of goes back to what I was saying, it's like that accountability where like there shouldn't be an excuse to like tweet something offensive now, do you know, like where it's like as a society, like have we not grown? Because like the examples we were all kind of giving was like even with celebrities, it'd be like, do you know, a tweet from like 2013, but like when we are kind of like just like listening to everyone just reflecting on it now, I'm like, why are we still engaging in that? Like why are people still like not getting like to what Gareth is saying, like educating yourself, like, or just genuinely like if you have a question on race, like do you not have a Black person to just go and be like, oh, I'm curious about this or that, as opposed to like going and tweeting out the N-word and not knowing that that's offensive? Like have we not as a society like moved away from that? Or like making homophobic jokes, like that's, do you know, like we've moved beyond that. So like when reflecting on it, like I hope that like that's still not a thing in 2021, that people are still like, oh, I didn't know this was offensive. Because just even with COVID, like we've all been stuck in the house. So like hoping that like with social media, we're kind of educating ourselves, and like platforms like Gorm, like you are engaging with social discourses and stuff like that. So like hoping then that like no one is going to still be making these things that where we're making excuses for like a tweet that has just come out in 2021 as opposed to like 2009. So it's kind of been like the way to move forward is by engaging in those uncomfortable conversations, but like kind of doing them like on a one-to-one as opposed to like a large platform, knowing that there's still that possibility that certain people are going to like agree with your wrongful ideas, with that sense when you're going to come out later and be like, oh, I didn't know I was wrong, even though like Google is free. So like, yeah, it kind of makes me think of like what is 2021 in regards to cancel culture. Like when you do have things like Google, we're all stuck inside, like why not use this time to educate yourself and kind of move away from those views, as opposed to like coming back in May and being like, oh, I didn't realize what I said was offensive.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with your sentiment that Google is free. So you guys educate yourself. So yeah, definitely. Eric, were you going to say something? And then I'm going to move to Sarah.
Yeah, I was just very briefly, just to agree with everyone who spoke there, Sandrine and Gareth, but also to say that it's so much easier to not confront people's views and to try not to convince them out of it. It's so much easier to finger point and not to try. But I think we need to choose the harder path and choose to see what we can do. As speaking to the example Gareth used to convince people out of their ways of thinking. Another really good example is a Black American man called Daryl Davis. He deliberately attended KKK rallies as a Black man in America. And what he did after rallies was he tried to befriend many members of the KKK simply to see whether he has the capacity to try and make them feel as if the views they held were simply nonsensical and dumb. And he befriended a lot of the KKK members after weeks of attending rallies and trying, because he was able to convince them that he too, as a Black man, shared a common humanity with them. And this is the most extreme example you could ever use in the context of racism, especially in America. Yet now, people who are nowhere near as extreme and regressive as the KKK in thinking are people we are overzealous about canceling, because we're unwilling to converse with them despite our differences, respect our differences, and see how we can morally move forward together. So I think if men like Daryl Davis, figures like him can do that, imagine what we could do if we tried and we chose the route that was less popular, least traveled by, but will lead to something more sustainable for society as a whole.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Eric. Sarah?
No, I was just going to say, like, in terms of going forward in 2021, I think we need to remember it's so easy for us to say, well, how do people tweet, offensive stuff now? And, Google's free and so on and so forth. But we have to remember that it is easy for us. A lot of people are going through different struggles in their lives. People, like, for example, just even the COVID-19 campaign regards, mask wearing, washing hands, social distancing. You'd think people would get the message and you'd think people would understand, how to do it, that way. But it just demonstrates that communicating to people is very, very difficult. So in this era where we have misinformation and disinformation rampant on social media, that the information that people are getting on TikTok, that are getting on Instagram, that are getting on Twitter and Facebook is not necessarily the right information, and it's not necessarily the factual information. So people are, being educated in a way. Like there's this platform, I think it's called, I forgot the name of it, Prager or something like that. I can't remember. But like this platform where they disseminate these videos that look absolutely professional and academic and to the point, and everything's legit. But when you actually listen to it, you're like, oh, hold on a moment. That is all not right, like fake information, fake news, and it's worrying, because that's what people are consuming, that type of media and that type of information that they're consuming, and that's where they get misunderstand. So then they might tweet something and think it's perfectly fine to say, and then you're like, no, that's not okay to say, and then they don't understand. So as much as Google's free and as much as there's opportunity for people to learn and so on, the internet is a dangerous place now. It's not a place that you can easily get, the right information. Digital literacy is not great. A lot of people don't understand what's going on. And I think that's COVID-19 this pandemic has really highlighted the issues with digital literacy. So I think yes, for us, it's easy to say, but I do think a lot of people are facing, day in, day out struggles, financial stresses and so on, that some people don't even turn on the news. I know of some principals in different schools that still don't turn on the news, and you think they would turn on the news to know what's going on, that way. So it's things like that. So I think it's important that sometimes we can all be stuck in our own bubble, and everybody else can be stuck in their little bubbles. And we just need to be careful that we don't assume that people are, that have that access, because they may not have that access or that digital literacy to understand what's, real information and what's fake information.
Definitely. I totally agree with that sentiment as well. And the importance of breaking out of that bubble or your echo chamber, but at the same time, like you were saying with digital literacy, it may be harder for some than others. So definitely agree with that. And just finally, we're just going to go to Tiziana and Shane there, just on the final notes and things like that. Tiziana?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I know people who aren't listening to the news now, but it's a way to try and protect their mental health, I guess, because, you're hearing about COVID so much that it's been very stressful for lots of people. So I can understand why we're doing it. or at least we're not listening all the time. But no, I wanted to say, yeah, it's much easier, if you are in your echo chamber, if you're preaching to the choir. So with cancel culture, you can avoid having difficult conversations, but I think it's not very good, because it's better, as Gareth and Eric have said, it's really important to try and connect with people who have different opinions, because even though we have different opinions, we are all humans, and then you can really have a fruitful conversation, and maybe making them change their minds. And even if they don't, it's still quite important to connect, at a deep level. It's not easy. It's much easier to cancel somebody, but I guess, yeah. So in the long run, cancel culture is probably not very beneficial for this reason, because it can shut down, conversation, genuine conversation and dialogue. But it is possible because of social media. Years ago, it was different, because maybe you were going to talk with your friends, and okay, celebrities, politicians already had a platform in the radio and the TV, but with the internet, I think, you write something and your followers can read it all over the world, and even somebody else. So it has really amplified the thing. And yeah, I think, I work as a teacher, and it's not exactly the same, but I always tell students, there is no question that is, not relevant, or that is too stupid. You have to be free to ask anything. And it's, in a way, it's the same. You have to be able to express your opinion, even though, it may be wrong and offensive, and then people should be able to point it out. But if you feel afraid to express it, it's not good. We don't want that kind of atmosphere.
Exactly. I totally resonate with that, in terms of like having people stay in a state of curiosity, because when they get to that stage where they're like, oh, I don't want to ask a question, they're just, again, stuck in that echo chamber, which where they can't break free from. Definitely. So Shane, you're going to be your final note here.
Been really great listening. Some really great points made. One thing I kind of wanted to touch on as well, that I think was kind of addressed, just in regards, we don't have a huge amounts to do, this year, and like, why can't people have learned or changed? I think a lot of people that are in like places of privilege just don't want to learn, don't want to change, and don't want to educate themselves. And I'm not saying that that's right, but I'm saying that's a lot of kind of what's going on as well with this year. And a lot of those kind of people that don't have that kind of growth mindset or level of empathy, all they want to do is kind of get back to their normal life and travel again, and have all those different freedoms that they once enjoyed, that a lot of people of society haven't. I also wanted to touch on something that Sarah made that I wasn't aware of. I know Trump was banned from Twitter, and I'd like to ask an open-ended question to anyone who can answer. But I didn't realize that there was another kind of platform, a right-wing platform, where all these people have kind of emigrated to, which is very sad to hear. Because me myself obviously thought that it was a good decision that was made, a good decision that was ultimately made too late as well. But what do you think could be done that would be maybe better serving in that situation?
Yeah, it's open to the floor if anyone wants to answer that.
I don't mind jumping in very briefly. The platform Sarah was speaking to is called PragerU. It's a very popular right-wing platform that a lot of people turn to. But I think if, like, as was stated earlier, something like Trumpism, if Trump is cancelled and Trumpism lives on, those who subscribe to the tenets of Trumpism will continue to do so unless Trumpism is debunked on a platform where they can see the flaws of it. I think in the case of Trump, it's a bit more complicated, because the reason why there was support for Trump was because of discrimination, xenophobia, and the like, but also because of economic deprivation and a lot of different reasons. So I think when it comes to ideas like that are hateful, you have to understand what those ideas are speaking to, the vulnerabilities that those ideas are appealing to, that draw people into believing in those ideas in the first place. And I think it's far better attacking the root cause of those ideas and the idea itself, showing people how bad and invalid it is, so they can feel they can then understand why they turn to better alternatives rather than subscribing to ideas that are just in and of itself wrong. So I go back to I revert to what I said previously. I think we need to spend our time attacking ideas and not necessarily people. If you take a child, for instance, when you discipline a child by telling them not to say something that is bad, you don't just tell them not to say something that is bad. You tell them why they shouldn't say what is bad at a particular stage in their growth, so they won't say it again. And it's not that they won't say it again because they're scared of discipline. They won't say it again because they know it's wrong. It's more holistic. And I think this approach needs to be extrapolated to all people within our society, especially when it comes to discourse, so we can teach people and educate people in a holistic way. And have them realize their opinions are valid as long as they don't impinge on the well-being of others, so that we can progress in a more progressive way. And I think this would work if this was the approach that was taken. But I think our impulse to want to silence people that we disagree with, or our impulse to want to just stop haters instead of stopping the ideas that might cause haters to hate, I think this is why things like Trumpism might live on and continue to fester.
Definitely. And on that, we are going to close the conversation. Guys, thank you so much for having this conversation. I think it's really important that we kind of unpack cancel culture, and definitely like what really resonated with me with this conversation, like what Sarah was saying, separating the call out culture and cancel culture itself, because the call out culture is that space in which people can educate themselves, be accountable for their actions, and eventually what we hope for is to have that kind of growth. And again, one thing that resonated with me in this conversation is the idea that we need to create a space to have healthy dialogue on topics that are uncomfortable, topics that matter, so we can it's not even about changing people's mind, it's about just planting. Someone told me before, it's about just planting a seed in their head, and they're just going to fester on that seed, and then hopefully what the hope is that it grows into something better, rather than canceling and saying, well, we're not going to talk to you about that anymore. You're not welcome in this circle. You're not allowed here anymore. Rather than canceling them, it's better just to create a space in which you can talk about their ideas that you may not agree with, and then having that seed planted in their head. So again, thank you guys so much for having this conversation. Thank you for watching this episode of Gorm TV. So what do you think about today's topic? We'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We have new videos coming out every 2 weeks that dissect the social issues that affect Ireland's multicultural generation. And do follow us on social media to join the conversation and be up to date in what we're doing.